We all lie to ourselves. We call it self-improvement. We call it research. We call it being disciplined.
But a lot of the time, we are just buying the right to feel busy.
Look at the shelf, the course, the notebook, the app subscription, the productivity guide,
The camera, the microphone, the beginner kit, the second monitor, the plant care set I bought because I decided, very bravely, that I was going to become the kind of man who keeps basil alive with AI. And here is the real question. When was the last time you did something that could not be posted, optimized, tracked, or monetized? That is the glitch. Not laziness, not moral failure, a glitch. Modern life taught us to turn leisure into output. Rest became content. Hobbies became brands. And the moment something stops producing value, we quietly start to distrust it. That feeling is not random. It has an origin.
10,000 years ago, idle time was dangerous. If you were not hunting, gathering, repairing, scanning, building, or helping the group, you were falling behind. The brain learned a simple rule. If it does not help survival, question it. That rule kept people alive then. Today, it makes us suspicious of joy. And TikTok did not invent that weakness. It exposed it, industrialized it, and sold it back to us in neon. Because now the question is not just, can I enjoy this? It is, can I turn this into a clip, a niche, a persona, a side hustle, a story, a revenue stream? That is where the hobby starts to die. Not when you lose interest, when you start translating it into value before you even begin. A hobby used to be a place to disappear into a task. It was one of the last private spaces in a public life. Now it often starts with a question. Can I make this a side hustle? Can I teach it? Can I film it? Can I post the process? Can I build an audience around it? Can I make it look like progress? And the answer to those questions changes the experience before the experience even begins. Because once the mind sees a possible audience, it stops behaving like a participant. It starts behaving like a producer. And when you become a producer, the hobby stops feeding you. It starts evaluating you. That is the first loss. The old version of a hobby did not need a justification. You played guitar because the strings felt alive under your fingers. You painted because color did something to your nervous system that language could not. You ran because the wind on your face made your thoughts quieter. You cooked because the chopping, the heat, the smell, the timing, all of it created a small island of order in a messy day. You read because you wanted to leave your own head for an hour. There was no audience in the room, no performance review, no growth chart, no one asking, but what is the ROI? That is exactly why it worked. Because flow state does not come from pressure, it comes from immersion. It is what happens when self-consciousness drops low enough for attention to fully enter the task. You stop watching yourself do the thing. You just do the thing. But flow state requires permission to be unproductive. It requires time that is not being harvested. And modern life is deeply uncomfortable with that. So we fill every gap. We buy the course. We buy the starter set. We buy the upgraded gear. We buy the template. We buy the planner. We buy the app that promises to help us become the kind of person who finally sticks with it. Actually, no. Let me be more precise. We often buy the fantasy of becoming a person whose hobby can justify itself. That is not the same thing. That is overconsumption wearing a polite mask. Overconsumption is not just buying too much. It is buying identity in advance. You do not just want the camera. You want the version of yourself the camera implies. You do not just want the notebook. You want the image of the person who journals at sunrise. You do not just want the instrument. You want the imagined montage of becoming someone worthy of applause. You do not just want the matcha set, or the running shoes, or the pottery wheel, or the vintage film camera, or the reading chair, or the sketchbook. You want proof that your life is coherent, and social media feeds that hunger perfectly, because every hobby can now be transformed into evidence. Painting becomes a before and after reveal. Running becomes a wearable summary. Cooking becomes a time-lapse. Reading becomes a bookshelf shot. Travel becomes a mood board. And even something as simple as caring for a plant, if you are me, turns into, let me ask AI what this leaf is. And suddenly I am not enjoying a quiet morning. I am operating a tiny botanical intelligence unit in my kitchen.
Pathetic. Efficient, deeply online, but useful, because that joke is not really about the plant. It is about the reflex. The moment we encounter something alive, slow, or ambiguous, we want to convert it into data. We want a label, a system, a score, a caption. We want the thing to become legible fast, because legibility feels like control. And that is what TikTok trains better than almost anything else. It trains speed. It trains compression. It trains public meaning. A hobby is no longer a private relationship with a task. It becomes a signal. Look at me being disciplined. Look at me being creative. Look at me being healthy. Look at me being interesting. Look at me becoming a better version of myself. And once the hobby becomes a signal, the emotional chemistry changes. Now every session has to produce something. A clip, a result, a visible improvement, a reason it counts. So the brain starts punishing simple enjoyment, because enjoyment without output feels inefficient. And inefficiency, to a nervous system shaped by constant comparison, can feel suspiciously close to failure. That is the second glitch. Not that people stopped liking things, that they stopped allowing things to remain small. The hobby no longer exists for restoration. It exists for signaling. And signaling has a cost. It turns your attention outward when the hobby needs it inward. It turns your hands into a marketing asset. It turns your curiosity into a content calendar. It turns your free time into a performance. The result is strange. People feel busy, but not nourished. They feel busy, but not restored. They feel busy, but not deeply engaged. They have many tabs open in the brain, and none of them are quiet. That is why so many people feel restless, even when they technically have time. They are surrounded by options, but starved of permission. The old brain says, if this does not increase your position, why are you doing it? The modern platform says, if this cannot be posted, why bother? And between those two voices, pleasure gets squeezed out. This is where the economic layer matters, because this is not only a psychology story, it is a market story. The attention economy does not merely observe our cravings. It manufactures better ways to monetize them. And hobby culture became one of its easiest targets. More gear, more courses, more subscriptions, more planners, more templates, more starter packs, more beginner systems, more aesthetic upgrades, more ways to turn a human afternoon into a business plan. That is the side hustle trap. The side hustle promises freedom. The market sells tools for freedom. The platform sells visibility. And the culture sells the dream that you are always one purchase away from becoming the person you were meant to be. But the hidden cost is brutal. You lose the thing hobbies were supposed to protect. Distance from utility. That distance matters more than people think. Because not everything in a healthy life needs to become efficient. Not everything needs to scale. Not everything needs to explain itself. A walk does not need a summary. A sketch does not need an audience. A meal does not need a brand. A song does not need a funnel. A conversation does not need to be clipped. Some things are valuable precisely because they disappear after they are lived. Research in behavioral economics keeps pointing to the same underlying pressure. When people are under stress, they narrow their focus to immediate payoff. The brain discounts delayed rewards. It reaches for visible ones. That is present bias. That is not stupidity. That is compression. Under pressure, the mind wants proof that effort matters right now. It wants a visible return. It wants a measurable sign that the hour was not wasted. So instead of playing guitar for an hour, you learn how to record guitar. Instead of drawing, you optimize your setup. Instead of reading, you build the perfect bookshelf aesthetic. Instead of cooking, you turn the kitchen into a filming environment. Instead of resting, you document the rest. And the original joy gets buried under infrastructure. That is the quiet tragedy. Not that people are unmotivated, that they are over-instrumented. They own too many tools for not enough living. And the tools begin to own the attention. This is where many people misunderstand the issue. They think the answer is to reject ambition. It is not. Ambition is fine. Building something meaningful is fine. Wanting to earn from a skill is fine. The problem begins when every activity must justify its existence through productivity. That is when the mind stops knowing how to rest. Because rest, in the modern frame, is only allowed if it becomes recovery from more output. Even leisure gets a job. And once leisure gets a job, it is no longer leisure. It is maintenance. The platform changes the emotional logic too. TikTok is built on rapid comparison. It gives you 1,000 tiny mirrors. Each one shows you someone younger, faster, cleaner, funnier, more disciplined, more aesthetic, more profitable. That does two things at once. First, it raises the standard of what counts as good enough. Second, it teaches you that being ordinary is invisible. So the brain starts negotiating. If I cannot be exceptional, maybe I can at least be interesting. If I cannot be interesting, maybe I can be useful. If I cannot be useful, maybe I can at least be documented. And that is how the hobby becomes content, even before the hobby begins. You are not asking, what do I want to do? You are asking, what will this say about me? That is a different nervous system, and it is exhausted. The deeper issue is that constant visibility destroys the conditions for play. Play requires safety. Play requires slack. Play requires the possibility that nothing serious is happening. Play requires the right to be bad at something without broadcasting the failure. But when every beginner phase is potentially public, people do not start freely. They start self-consciously. And self-consciousness is poison to exploration. Because exploration needs room for awkwardness. It needs repetition. It needs boredom. It needs the dignity of being unseen while you are still learning. Without that, people mistake the early clumsiness of learning for evidence that they are not that kind of person. So they quit. Or they keep going, but only in a way that can be displayed. Either way, the hobby loses its soul. And here is the part I want to say carefully. This is not because you are weak. It is because your brain is doing exactly what brains do. It is looking for status, safety, and efficient rewards. A hobby that cannot be converted into a signal feels, to the modern mind, slightly dangerous. Not because it is dangerous, because it is private. And privacy now feels unfamiliar. That is the evolutionary mismatch. 10,000 years ago, your brain was built for belonging, utility, and visible contribution to the group. Today, the group is an invisible audience with infinite comparison points. No wonder the mind gets confused. No wonder it keeps trying to turn pleasure into proof. No wonder so many people feel guilty when they are simply being. So what is the neutralization tool? Not a giant life overhaul. Not a productivity hack. Not another app. A boundary. One hobby. One rule. No monetization. No posting. No optimizing. No audience. For a fixed window of time, the activity is allowed to exist for one purpose only: presence. Start smaller than your ego wants. 30 minutes, twice a week. Maybe less, if that is where honesty begins. Put the phone away. Leave the camera off. Do not narrate the process for anyone else. Do not turn the result into a profile asset. Do not ask whether it scales. Do not ask whether it fits your brand. Just do the thing. And if your mind resists, good. That resistance is the glitch surfacing. It will say this is inefficient. It will say you are wasting time. It will say someone else is getting ahead. It will say this would make a better post. It will say you should make this useful. That is the exact moment to stay, because you are not fighting laziness. You are breaking a conditioning loop. You are teaching the brain that not everything meaningful has to be harvested. Over time, this changes the texture of life. You start noticing that some activities become richer when no one is watching. You start feeling the difference between doing and displaying. You start remembering that a quiet afternoon can still count, even if nobody applauds it. You start recovering the ancient dignity of unmonetized attention. And that matters more than it sounds. Because a person who cannot enjoy anything unless it can be used eventually becomes brittle. They become efficient, but not alive. Visible, but not nourished. Productive, but not playful. And then they wonder why the days feel thin. The answer is usually not that they need more ambition. It is that they need less conversion, less turning, less packaging, less constant translation of every human impulse into public value. So let me say it plainly. If you have turned every hobby into a project, you have not become more disciplined. You may have become more afraid of silence. If you keep buying tools for a life you never actually live, you are not investing.
You may be postponing the moment when you have to feel the activity itself.
If you can only enjoy something when it can be shown, sold, or measured, the platform has already trained your nervous system. Not in a dramatic way, in a slow one scroll at a time, one comparison at a time, one should I monetize this at a time. And that is why the update matters, because the update is not anti-success, it is anti-capture. It gives your attention back its private life.
The hobby does not need to justify itself. The walk does not need to become a reel. The book does not need to become a summary. The meal does not need to become a brand. The plant does not need to become a content niche.
Sometimes, it is enough that something exists and is enjoyed.
That is not wasted time. That is the opposite of waste.
The glitch is real. So is the update. And I want to leave you with one question. What is one thing you still do or used to do that cannot be turned into content? Tell me in the comments.